A woman jogging notices a doll on the ground. As she reaches out to pick it up, a wolf-like figure suddenly attacks her. The scene shifts to two detectives, Nick Burkhart and Hank Griffin, who are observing women in the area when one of them unexpectedly transforms into a monstrous figure. Nick is confused and unsure if she is real or just a hallucination. Later, Nick and Hank go to the crime scene to investigate. There, Nick finds the victim's iPod, playing the song Sweet Dreams. At night, Nick returns home to find his Aunt Marie. After his parents' death, Aunt Marie raised him. As they talk outside, a monstrous creature attacks them. Nick manages to shoot and kill the creature, which then transforms back into a human. Aunt Marie, injured from the fight, lies on the ground. She tells Nick that his parents didn't die in a crash, they were killed. She then hands Nick an antique key and urges him to protect it. At the hospital, Aunt Marie regains consciousness and reveals that Nick is a Grimm, a person with special powers who can see things others cannot. She tells him that if he wants more answers, he should visit her trailer. Nick heads to the trailer where he finds strange books and weapons. Just as he's looking through the books, his girlfriend, Juliet, arrives, so he quickly closes the book and leaves with her. The next day, Nick and Hank investigate a missing girl who was last seen walking to her grandparents' house. They follow her route and find boot prints leading them to a house where Nick witnesses a man transform into a wolf-like creature. Nick believes the man is responsible for the girl's disappearance and attacks him. However, when backup arrives, no evidence is found. That night, Nick returns to the man's house, keeping an eye on him. The man eventually confronts Nick, and after a brief exchange, invites him inside for a drink. The man, Monroe, reveals that he's a bloodbad, a creature from Nick's Grimm books known as the Big Bad Wolf. Monroe shares that Grimms have written about his kind for centuries. Nick, still trying to understand everything, asks Monroe for help in finding the missing girl. Monroe hesitates but agrees, using his bloodbad abilities to track her scent. They go to a house where the girl is being held. Nick calls Hank for backup, and together, they confront the kidnapper, who claims to be a postman. They find no direct evidence linking him to the crime, but as they're about to leave, Hank hears a song he recognizes from the missing girl's iPod. They return to the house, now in the dark, and the kidnapper attacks them. Hank shoots him, and as the man falls, he transforms back into a normal human. Before he dies, he calls Nick a Grimm. The detectives then search the house again and find the missing girl locked in the basement. Later that night, when Nick visits Aunt Marie, the same girl from earlier appears again, trying to inject Aunt Marie. Nick intervenes, and the needle ends up in him, causing him to lose consciousness. The girl then meets with Captain Sean Renard, the captain of the Portland Police Department, revealing that they're both involved in a larger plot against Aunt Marie and Nick. A couple, Rocky and Gilda, sneak into an empty house while the owners are away. They drink beer, eat food from the fridge, and head to the bedroom. Suddenly, a car pulls up. The guy looks out the window and sees someone approaching, so he panics, and they decide to escape through the window. The girl jumps out first, but just as the guy is about to follow, a creature attacks him. The girl runs away in horror. Nick later learns from a doctor that traces of PHTX-3 neurotoxin, commonly found in spider bites, are in his blood. The doctor advises him to visit the hospital if he feels feverish. Nick and Hank review CCTV footage to identify the girl who attacked Nick, but her face is unclear. In the next scene, Gilda is at the police station to file a report on her boyfriend's disappearance. She leads Nick and Hank back to the house where it all happened. There, they meet the owners, Frank and his wife, Diane, who demand that the intruders be caught. While investigating, Nick notices a strange claw in the glass. Nick later visits Aunt Marie in the hospital, where she tells him that it is now his responsibility to hunt dangerous Wesson, just like his ancestors. She also warns him about a secret group, the Reapers, that recently attacked her. She urges Nick to keep the trailer's existence a secret. Before she can say more, her health worsens, and a nurse asks Nick to leave. Nick and Hank return to the house to question Barry, Frank's son. Nick notices Barry's face briefly transform into a bear. Later, Nick visits Monroe, who identifies the claw as belonging to a Jaeger bar, a Wesen that uses the claws during a Rohats ritual, where they hunt prey as the sun sets. Gilda, angry and armed with a gun, arrives at Diane's house and asks her about Rocky. That's when Barry attacks her. Nick goes to Frank and warns him that Barry plans to kill Rocky during the ritual. They rush to a cave, but Rocky and Gilda have already escaped. In the jungle, Frank tries to stop Barry, but Diane accidentally triggers one of Barry's traps and gets severely injured. The medical team takes her to the hospital and the police arrest Barry and his accomplices. Later, Aunt Marie is attacked in the hospital, and Nick arrives just in time, but he is unable to save her. She dies in his arms. The final scene shows Nick at her grave, unaware that a creature watches him from behind the bushes. People board a tram, including a sharply dressed woman and a man carrying a suspiciously large duffel bag. Tension builds as the man reaches inside, but instead of pulling out a weapon, he surprises everyone by taking out a stereo. Suddenly, YMCA starts blasting and the tram erupts into an unexpected flash mob. The driver and regular passengers are left confused, but when the tram stops and empties, the driver discovers the sharply dressed woman lying dead on the floor. Nick and Hank arrive at the scene to investigate. The woman's body is swollen, leading Sergeant Wu to suggest anaphylactic shock. He mentions a recent incident where a dog was attacked by a swarm of bees in the park. Nick notices a small puncture wound behind the woman's ear. Later, the medical examiner, Dr. Harper, confirms that Serena, the victim, died from an abnormally high dose of bee venom, classifying her death as a homicide. At Serena's law firm, her sudden death leaves her coworkers and boss shocked. In the next scene, Nick and Hank consult a beekeeper to learn more about the venom. The beekeeper reveals that the venom is artificially harvested, but raises suspicion by providing an alibi without being asked. Surveillance footage from the tram doesn't reveal much, but a few witnesses from the flash mob come forward. One of them, Doug, acts suspiciously, refusing to show his phone during questioning. When pressed, Doug transforms briefly into an insect-like weazen, confirming Nick's suspicion that this case involves the weazen world. Nick and Hank follow Doug to an abandoned paper mill. There, they spot him meeting with another man and a woman, exchanging mysterious items. Suddenly, a swarm of bees attacks, forcing Nick and Hank to take cover. After the attack, the detectives link the mill to Melissa Wincroft, a woman whose business was destroyed in a lawsuit led by Serena and her colleagues. Nick identifies Melissa as a mellifer, a bee-like Wesson who can communicate with bees and use them as a warning system. It becomes clear that Melissa is targeting Serena's colleagues for revenge. Adeline Shade, the final target, is in protective custody, and the tension rises. Nick realizes that Adeline is the Hexen beast who attacked his aunt, leading to a confrontation filled with distrust. Meanwhile, Melissa and her accomplice, the beekeeper, find them and use bees to corner Adeline. Melissa tells Nick that she's trying to protect him from a bigger threat. In the final showdown, Melissa warns Nick about his fate as a Grimm and the danger ahead. When she threatens Hank, Nick is forced to act, and Melissa is shot. As she dies, the bees also die. Her last words about Nick's destiny unsettle him. Back at home, Nick thinks about everything that's happening and knows Melissa's warning is serious. Just then, a lone bee stings him, a sign that the danger isn't over. A terrified woman smashes her hand through a glass window and flees into the night, pursued by unseen terrors. She sprints across a bridge, reacting in panic to phantom images of a tentacle-like monster and a buzzing saw blade. Suddenly, a car strikes her. The driver, Kent, rushes to help, but another man appears and calmly instructs him to call 911. The man touches the woman's cheek, and in a chilling moment, she whispers for him to kiss her. Instead, he kills her. By morning, detectives Nick and Hank arrive at the scene. Kent, treated for minor injuries, recounts the accident and describes the mysterious man who disappeared. As the detectives examine the woman's body, they notice unusual injuries on her arms, suggesting she was fleeing from something far worse than the car accident. Meanwhile, a man enters an empty hotel room carrying a briefcase. On a phone call, he cryptically assures someone that he will notify them when it is done. A report about a previous encounter with a Grimm and a Reaper flashes on a newspaper, revealing the Reaper's identity and setting the stage for the conflict ahead. Later, Dr. Harper informs Nick that the woman's cause of death doesn't match the accident. She identifies signs of asphyxiation, pointing to foul play. Hank discovers the victim is Faith, a woman who lives with her abusive husband, Roy. When the detectives visit Roy at work, he denies any involvement in her death, claiming they argued the previous night over her social media activity and that she stormed out. Despite having no alibi, Roy insists he was waiting for her to return. As Nick and Hank investigate further, they uncover a troubling social media post from Faith that leads them to a bed-and-breakfast hotel near the bridge where she was killed. The owner, Billy, appears friendly but holds a dark secret. Billy recalls Faith's visit and mentions she seemed distressed. Sensing something supernatural, Nick grows suspicious. Later, Billy is shown consuming a dead toad, revealing his Wesson nature. The investigation takes a darker turn as Nick and Hank uncover a disturbing pattern of missing women linked to Billy. Their findings reveal that in other cities, women have been found alive but pregnant, kept in isolation, and subjected to gas attacks. While staking out Billy's house, Hank notices a recently repaired window where Faith likely injured herself. Inside, he hears muffled cries and discovers women trapped in cages, moments before they are exposed to gas. Nick asks Monroe for help to track Billy, a Wesson who uses supernatural charm to control his victims. Meanwhile, Captain Renard confronts the Reaper, cutting off his ear and warning him to stay away. When Nick and Monroe locate Billy's house, they rescue Hank and the captive women from the gas-filled basement. Billy tries to escape with another victim, leading to a dramatic chase. Though Billy is struck by a car, He uses his powers to trap a paramedic, giving himself a chance to flee. The final scene underscores that, even in captivity, Billy remains a dangerous and ongoing threat. At a quiet dockyard, rats move over a dead bird. The calm is disrupted by loud music from a nearby rave. The crowd cheers for DJ Wretched Cat, who appears wearing a glowing pink cat head, intensifying the dark and mysterious atmosphere. Meanwhile, in a quiet music room, teacher Paul Lawson conducts a lesson with his students. When Brimley, one of the students, plays the wrong note, Lawson stops the class to correct him. Later, as Lawson walks to his car, he is enveloped in darkness and a swarm of rats suddenly surrounds his car, triggering a panic. The next morning, Assistant Principal Grace Kaplan discovers his body in the school parking lot and calls the police. Nick and Hank arrive at the scene, where Grace explains how she found Lawson's body upon arriving at school. Sergeant Wu discovers rat cages marked with the name Geiger Pest Control, leading the detectives to question Lawson's students, Carter, Sarah, Marvin, and Trey, all from affluent backgrounds. During the questioning, Carter mentions Roddy Geiger, a former student now working at his father's pest control business. The detectives visit Geiger Pest Control, where they find Roddy playing the violin, surrounded by caged rats. As Nick introduces himself, Roddy's father, Geiger, briefly reveals his true form as a Reinigen, a rat-like Wesen, and acts aggressively toward Nick. Roddy, frightened, runs away, but Nick manages to confront him and tries to earn his trust. Geiger accuses Carter and the other students of bullying Roddy and reveals they stole rat cages from the business. Roddy eventually opens up to Nick about his passion for playing the violin and the mistreatment he endures. He admits to being DJ Wretched Cat, but provides an alibi that Wu confirms, as he knows Roddy from the Portland rave scene. Further investigation reveals that Lawson suffered a heart attack triggered by the rats, but the rats were not the direct cause of his death. Fibers found in a rat's stomach match a blanket from an expensive car, linking Lawson's death to Carter and his friends. As the investigation progresses, Sarah's mother accuses Roddy of harassing her daughter, but her dismissive and elitist attitude raises doubts about her claims. Later, Nick consults Monroe, who explains that Reinigen is usually peaceful unless provoked. Nick and Hank discover that Carter, Trey, and Marvin framed Roddy, leading to his expulsion from school. Driven by anger, Roddy uses his violin to summon a swarm of rats to a rave at an abandoned warehouse. Unaware of the danger, the rich kids attend the rave and are attacked by the rats. Sarah, conflicted between her loyalty to her friends and her feelings for Roddy, confronts Carter but ultimately follows the group inside. Nick and Hank arrive just in time to prevent the situation from escalating further, dispersing the rats and rescuing the students. However, Roddy escapes, leaving his fate uncertain. The episode ends with Nick thinking about how his grim identity pushes Wesen away, while Juliet quietly deals with the growing problems in their lives, suggesting more challenges ahead. In the night, we see a geodome house in the forest. Inside, Hap Lasser, caught between his love for food and efforts to stay healthy, amusingly works out with a vibrating exercise barbell. The barbell slips from his hands, flies out the window, and lands outside. When Hap goes to get it, his house explodes. He is shocked, but miraculously unharmed. The next morning, Nick and Hank investigate the explosion and question Hap. He is more upset about losing his stuff, especially his Xena Warrior Princess comic. When Nick asks if he has been making bombs, Hap gets angry, shifts into his Bloodbad form, and denies it. He also mentions his brother, Rolf, who died in a similar explosion, hinting at a dangerous pattern. At the station, Hap calls Monroe, his old friend, and asks if he can stay with him. Nick questions Hap about possible suspects, but Hap says he's a nice guy who gets along with everyone, even people he owes money to. Monroe, Nick's Bloodbad friend, arrives at the station and admits he knows Hap from a treatment program. Nick asks Monroe to watch over Hap. Meanwhile, a mysterious biker checks the explosion site, looking at a broken gas pipe and a family photo. Nick and Hank investigate Hap's debts and Rolf's death, but find no clear leads. Monroe takes Hap to his house, but Hap notices Monroe seems uneasy. Monroe tries to reassure him but remains on edge. Nick visits Monroe's house but is attacked by a biker, who turns out to be Angie, Hap's sister and Monroe's ex. Angie is angry at Nick for being a Grimm, but Monroe steps in to calm her down. She tells Nick that Hap made her his insurance beneficiary, which makes her look suspicious. Angie gives an alibi, but Nick doesn't believe her. That night, Monroe and Angie go on a Bloodbad run, falling back into old habits. The next morning, Monroe wakes up in the woods with Angie and is shocked to see blood on their hands, proof of a hunt. Meanwhile, Hap answers the door to an assassin disguised as a delivery man and is fatally shot. Nick, Hank, and Monroe investigate and discover a link between Angie and Orson, an arson investigator who is a Bauerschwein, a pig-like Wesen. Orson believes Angie killed his brothers, which makes him angry and vengeful. In a tense showdown, Nick faces Orson, but Angie shows up and attacks him. Nick shoots at her, but she manages to escape. In the end, Orson is linked to several crimes, and Monroe is left devastated by Hap's death and his complicated history with Angie. The final scene shows Monroe watching an old childhood photo of himself and Angie sharing a kiss. A couple, Dustin and Lauren, hike through the woods. They accidentally stumble upon a hidden drug crop and are captured by a gunman named Delmar, who takes them to his camp. Just as Delmar prepares to kill them, he hears a noise coming from the woods. When he steps away to investigate, he is attacked and killed by something unnatural. A vine wraps around his neck and strangles him as strange growls fill the forest. Dustin and Lauren watch the horrifying scene unfold, frozen in fear. The next morning, Nick and Hank arrive at the camp with other officers and DEA agents to investigate the drug crop. A DEA agent examines Delmar's body, noting his unnaturally twisted neck, and mentions that Delmar has been under investigation for 3 years. While inspecting the scene, Nick spots a single hair that doesn't belong to bald Delmar. Hank suspects someone else is involved. They also notice that Delmar's supplies have been raided, but the drugs are left untouched. Near Delmar's body, Nick spots another hair close to a broken sapling. While searching the area, Nick catches a glimpse of a supernatural creature. It looks like a young bloodbath, but before he can act, the creature, later revealed to be a teenage girl, runs off into the woods. Nick and Hank interview Dustin and Lauren, who explain their abduction and describe how the mysterious attacker saved their lives. Meanwhile, Delmar's brothers, Randall and Micah, arrive in town, furious and seeking revenge. At the morgue, they examine Delmar's body and angrily demand answers, certain there's more to his death than the police claim. As the investigation continues, Nick and Hank discover that the mysterious hair matches a case from 9 years earlier involving a missing girl named Holly Clark. Nick visits Monroe, who explains that Holly's bloodbath instincts likely helped her survive in the wild. Not knowing her true nature, Holly has been living in the woods all these years. Nick and Monroe search the forest and find Holly's treehouse. Inside, they see items she uses to survive, including a trunk labeled Addison. Hank and Wu dig into Holly's past and uncover evidence pointing to Jimmy Addison, a former neighbor, as her abductor. When the team confronts Addison, he tries to fight back but is quickly caught, proving he is guilty. At the same time, Randall and Micah kidnap Dustin, believing he knows what happened to Delmar. Their search leads them to Holly's treehouse, where they mistake Monroe for the person responsible for their brother's death. During the confrontation, a violent fight breaks out. Holly uses her supernatural abilities to stop one of the brothers, while Nick takes down the other. Holly is badly injured but finally remembers who she is. She is taken back to her mother, who has been waiting for her return for years. A few days later, Captain Renard announces Holly's recovery during a press conference. Holly also identifies Addison as the man who abducted her 9 years earlier. The episode ends with justice being served as Addison is held accountable for his crimes. On a tense night, Judge Logan Pattinson sits in his upscale study. Suddenly, an intruder smashes through the window and violently attacks the judge. The attacker, who seems immune to pain and incredibly strong, survives gunshots and keeps pounding the judge. Later, Sergeant Wu and his partner find Judge Pattinson's body in his house. The attacker, later identified as Stark, retreats to a secluded spot to treat his wounds. He casually removes a bullet and tosses away his severed hand, which regenerates, revealing he's not human. Nick and Hank are called to the crime scene, and Police Chief Renard joins them. A clue at the scene, a gavel with fingerprints, leads them to another body, a man with a missing hand wearing a woman's watch. As they dig deeper, they realize the murders are all connected. Nick turns to Monroe, his friend who knows a lot about the Weazen world, for help. Monroe notices that the time and date on the watch are fixed, pointing them to Assistant District Attorney Mary Robinson. When they go to check on Mary, they find her dead, with her tongue cut out and placed on a scale. Hank puts it together. Judge Pattinson, Vince Chilton, and Mary Robinson were all involved in convicting Stark for murder years ago. Hank realizes he's next in line to be targeted and agrees to go into protective custody. While Hank is secured, Nick keeps investigating. Stark, hunting Hank, breaks into Nick's house and attacks him. During the fight, both Nick and Stark realize each other's true nature. Nick is a Grimm, and Stark is a Siegbarsta. Stark's strength almost defeats Nick, but Juliet saves him by throwing boiling water at Stark, forcing him to flee. Nick is badly hurt and rushed to the hospital. In the hospital, Monroe visits Nick and explains that Siegbarsta are nearly impossible to kill, except with specific weapons. Luckily, Nick has those weapons in Aunt Marie's trailer. Monroe goes to the trailer and picks up the weapon. Meanwhile, Hank feels guilty for Nick's injuries and decides to take action. He admits to Nick that he and Mary Robinson suppressed evidence during Stark's original trial to ensure his conviction. Determined to stop Stark, Hank agrees to set a trap. In the final showdown, Hank's gun gun is useless against Stark's resilience, but Monroe uses the special weapon to kill Stark, saving Hank and stopping the killing. In a tense moment in a parking garage, a man in a red shirt confronts another man, accusing him of something. As the man in the red shirt chases him deeper into the garage, he hears a strange noise. Turning around, he faces a terrifying figure who kills him in the confrontation. In a shocking twist, the man's body rapidly ages, looking like he's in his 70s before the attacker dumps him in a dumpster. By morning, when the garbage truck picks up the body, it's young again. Detectives Nick, Hank, and Wu are called to investigate this strange murder. The man in the red shirt is identified as Drake. The investigation leads them to his apartment, where the landlord mentions a fight between Drake, his neighbor Mason, and his girlfriend, Natalie. They find out that Drake has a history of domestic violence, and Natalie has run away from the scene. When they find Natalie, she tells them that a man named Marty, a downstairs neighbor, tries to help during the fight but leaves when Mason shows up. She thinks Mason might be involved in Drake's death, though she admits Drake has many enemies. The investigation focuses on Marty, a quiet, timid man who doesn't seem like the type to fight Drake. But Marty turns out to be a Mauserts, a harmless, mouse-like weazen. Monroe, Nick's bloodbad friend, explains that Mauserts are peaceful, unlike Mason, who is a Lausenschlange, a dangerous snake-like wizen. Monroe warns Nick that when a Mauserts and Lausenschlange clash, it's never good for the Mauserts. Meanwhile, Juliet notices a man and a woman taking pictures of her from an orange car. When she approaches them, they drive off. She tracks them down and finds a terrified woman. The mystery deepens when Monroe is attacked during a clock repair appointment, and he wakes up to find a cryptic red scythe symbol painted on his car. As more people are killed, Marty's hidden anger toward Mason comes to light. Marty, overwhelmed by his emotions and seeing his abusive father in every reflection, kills Mason. He loses control and runs through his warehouse, with Nick and Hank chasing him. Surrounded by mirrors that confuse him, Marty lets Natalie go, but is filled with grief and guilt. Later, Nick visits Monroe, who explains that the scythe symbol is a warning from the Reapers. Even though Nick is worried, Monroe stays loyal and ready to help him face the dangers of the Weazen world. A tense chase unfolds in the forest as two young men, Stephen and Kevin, are pursued by strange, grotesque creatures with pointed noses. Stephen, injured, falls into a river, and Kevin is captured. As Stephen's body floats downstream, a crow begins pecking at his eyes. Back home, Nick struggles with the secret of being a Grimm and the danger it could bring to his girlfriend, Juliet. Monroe, his Wezen friend, advises him not to tell her, saying that humans wouldn't understand these creatures. Nick's focus shifts when Stephen's body is found. The detectives notice strange puncture marks on his neck, which suggest he lost more blood than the river could explain. The coroner confirms that Stephen lost 7 pints of blood before drowning. The investigation leads them to a P.O. box registered to Stephen, but it leads to no answers. However, a young girl wearing a necklace like Stephen's points them to Gracie, who knew him. Gracie is devastated by Stephen's death and tells the detectives that the last time she saw him, he was at a free clinic. At the clinic, the doctors claim Stephen only needed treatment for a spider bite, but things take a darker turn when a man is caught transporting human organs and blood. Nick and Hank dig deeper into a dangerous underground world and discover a human organ trafficking ring run by Dr. Levine, a sinister doctor. Monroe helps by going undercover to get a human gallbladder for the illegal organ market. The blood from the accident matches Stephen's, and Nick suspects that street kids are being targeted. After having dinner with Gracie and her brother Hanson, more missing kids are found, leading the team to a dangerous confrontation at a trailer where human organs are being dried. The investigation reaches its climax with a violent shootout at a house connected to the trafficking ring. Dr. Levine is confronted by Nick, but escapes into the forest. In the final struggle, she falls into a fire pit. Meanwhile, Renard receives a disturbing package containing the ear of a Reaper, signaling that Nick's actions are attracting powerful enemies. In an art gallery, a man named Ryan talks on the phone. He notices a woman and approaches her, offering her a drink. She declines, saying she has to leave. As she exits, he follows her and convinces her to come to his apartment. Once there, he tries to seduce her, but she becomes uncomfortable and tries to leave. He attacks her, but she transforms into a spider-like creature, spits a white fluid into his mouth, and kills him. Afterwards, she leaves, and we see one of her fingers is severed. Nick and Hank arrive at the crime scene, where Sergeant Franco tells them the victim's name is Ryan, and his Rolex watch is missing. While examining the body, Nick finds a severed finger that begins to move. They take the body to Dr. Harper, who reveals that Ryan's organs were dissolved by a highly corrosive acid. At the police station, Sergeant Franco tells Nick and Hank about a similar case from 5 years ago in Phoenix. They examine photos of the victim, which match Ryan's condition. Hank reviews the toxicology report, finding spider venom in Ryan's system. Later that night in his trailer, Nick finds a picture of a spider-like woman in a book. In the next scene, the same woman who killed Ryan claims another victim in a similar way. The detectives review hotel footage and spot a blonde woman they believe is the killer. That night, Nick visits Monroe, who identifies the creature as a spinatod, a spider-like wezen. Monroe doesn't know much about them, but suggests someone who might help. The next scene shows the killer woman having dinner with her family. She gives her husband a Rolex watch, and they share a kiss. Monroe then takes Nick to meet Charlotte, an older woman who explains that spinatods rapidly age and need to kill young men to drain their life force and reverse the aging. Back at the station, Hank tells Nick they find Ryan's Rolex. This leads them to Washington Middle School, where they meet a young girl, Sally Marcinko, who says she got the watch from her father. They visit Sally's home and arrest her father, John Oblinger. At the house, Hank notices Sally's mother, Lena, has an injured finger. When asked, she says she cut it while working in the kitchen, but it's healed. At the station, Nick learns that the severed finger found near Ryan's body matches Lena's fingerprints, revealing her as the killer. They rush to her house, but she's already gone. Sergeant Franco informs them Lena's car was found at River Place Marina. At the marina, Lena is on a boat with another man. Nick and Hank arrive, and Nick searches the boat. Lena ambushes him, but Nick fires at her, forcing her to flee. Nick chases her down and traps her in a fishing net. In the final scene, Lena is in jail, and her body starts to age rapidly. An elderly man searches for his dog outside his house. Suddenly, a creature attacks him. He retaliates but ends up attacking his wife, killing both of them. The creature then begins eating them. Meanwhile, a group of people on horseback arrives, calling out the name Dimitri. The creature tries to escape but is soon captured by the riders, who drag it away. The detectives and police arrive at the crime scene, where Sergeant Franco informs them that the victims are Ed and Lois Weller. Ed was a retired lumber executive who recently took early retirement. As Nick and Hank examine the scene, they suspect a wild animal attack. Outside the house, they find numerous horse tracks, and Nick discovers a saddle, which he takes for further investigation. Hank later tells Nick that the blood at the scene matches a man named Dimitri Skantos. Dimitri has a criminal record and was recently released on probation after serving a year for selling cocaine. Hank adds that Dimitri's parole officer, Leo Tamor, is waiting for them at his office. At Leo's office, Nick and Hank ask about Dimitri. Leo explains that Dimitri works for his uncle at a boxing gym. They visit the gym and meet Dimitri's uncle, Gus Pappas, who says he hasn't seen Dimitri in weeks. Gus points them to a man named Brian, who might know something. When Nick talks to Brian, he learns that Brian last saw Dimitri a few weeks ago at a party celebrating his parole. Brian takes Nick and Hank to Forest Park, where Dimitri and others often jog. While searching the park, Hank gets a call about Dimitri's abandoned car being found near a warehouse in Linton. At the warehouse, Nick spots a man and follows him. Inside, they find blood everywhere, along with strange symbols and ancient weapons. It becomes clear the warehouse is used as a fight club. Meanwhile, Captain Renard confronts Leo, warning him that these fights are getting out of control. He also notes that Dimitri wasn't on the approved list of participants and demands Leo ensure this doesn't happen again. Later, Nick visits the trailer and discovers weapons similar to those found in the warehouse. Monroe stops by, and Nick asks him about the Lowen Games. Monroe explains that these are brutal, illegal fights organized by Lowen, lion-like Wesen who enjoy bloodshed. They abduct innocent people and force them to fight to the death. Nick asks if such fights are still happening. Monroe isn't sure, but mentions someone who might know more. Monroe meets with a man named Solly, who gives him an address and tells him to be there by 6 p.m. Monroe informs Nick and heads to the location. While talking to Nick on the phone, a horse trailer approaches Monroe. Nick warns him to leave, but before he can, Monroe is attacked and kidnapped. Nick arrives at the scene of Monroe's kidnapping and encounters a man in a car. Nick forces the man to reveal Monroe's location. Meanwhile, it's revealed that Leo is the mastermind behind the fight club. Monroe is thrown into the ring and forced to fight a powerful opponent. Nick reaches the fight club and calls Hank, requesting backup. Seeing Leo, Nick demands Monroe's release, but Leo insists that the fights are to the death, and only one can survive. Nick offers to fight in Monroe's place. While the fight ensues, Renard meets with a priest at a church, discussing Leo and urging him to put an end to his activities. Back at the fight club, Hank arrives with backup, arresting everyone. In the final scene, Renard confronts Leo, accusing him of causing all the chaos and warning him of the consequences. Just then, a creature attacks and kills Leo. 3 men in a house prepare weapons for a robbery. Tension rises as 2 of them argue and reveal their Wesen forms, Shakal, jackal-like creatures. Their leader angrily intervenes, warning them to stop fighting or face death. The target is a jewelry store, where the elderly owner, Samuel Bertram, hides in a walk-in safe. He prioritizes securing a small box of coins over anything else. When the robbers break into the safe, they discover Bertram dead, and the coins are gone. Nick and Hank arrive at the scene to investigate. Hank shares a personal connection to the jeweler, mentioning that he had bought an engagement ring from him in the past. Wu reports that only coins were stolen, suggesting the robbery wasn't random. Meanwhile, the robbers grow increasingly frustrated when they realize the coins they wanted are missing. The leader accuses the others of hiding them and decides to return to the crime scene. Back at their house, the two remaining robbers are ambushed by a tall Steinadler, an eagle-like creature. The Steinadler manipulates them into shooting each other. The leader, now the sole survivor, revisits the jewelry store but still doesn't find the coins. Nick spots him shifting into his Shakal form and chases him, but the robber escapes. Security footage reveals the robber's car, and Wu tracks down its license plate. At their hideout, the leader confronts the Steinadler, revealed to be Farley Colt. The two have been searching for the coins for years. Farley warns the leader about the coin's dangerous power, explaining that it makes people act irrationally. During the autopsy, Harper finds the missing coins and notices one bears a swastika. She struggles to explain Bertram's death, as gold alone shouldn't have caused such a reaction. Despite Harper's warnings, Hank insists on taking the coins. Soon after, the robber's car is found outside the house. Hank's sudden aggression worries Nick, but they continue the investigation. Inside, they arrest Farley, but the last robber escapes. Hank's erratic behavior intensifies, and later, a patrolman is found dead at the scene. At the police station, Farley cooperates with Nick and explains the story of the coins of Zakynthos. Made in ancient Greece, the coins have been passed through different empires. They give their owners great charm and power, but also twist their thoughts and corrupt them. Farley warns Nick about the coins' danger, saying that only Grimms can resist their effects. He also hints at a Grimm's murder 18 years ago and mentions a woman raising her nephew, suggesting a connection to Nick's family. Meanwhile, Renard, now holding the coins, falls under their spell and begins to have grand and unrealistic ideas about himself. Soledad Marquesa, the escaped robber, threatens Harper to learn where the coins are. Nick later uncovers Farley's connection to Aunt Marie and learns Farley was once engaged to her and involved in the events surrounding Nick's parents' deaths. In a tense showdown, Nick, Hank, and Farley confront Marquesa as he tries to attack Renard. Marquesa is killed before revealing more about Nick's past. Farley escapes, but is later confronted by Nick in his hotel room. After a struggle, Nick retrieves the coins. Recognizing their danger, he locks them away in the weapons cupboard in his trailer. The episode ends with a reel found among Farley's belongings, showing Adolf Hitler as a Vasen, whose influence was amplified by the coins during his speeches. Two thieves break into a factory to steal copper, only to discover that someone else has already taken it. As they search the factory, they are attacked and burned alive by a Vasen resembling a dragon, known as a Demonfuhr. Shortly after, a badly burned man stumbles away from the scene, escaping on a rail cart. The next morning, Nick and Hank investigate the factory with arson investigator Jordan. The bodies of the thieves are burned with a substance similar to napalm, though no accelerant is found. The factory owner, Truman, explains that his copper has been targeted in multiple break-ins and that no security measures seem to work. Nick notices that the lock on the factory door looks melted, and Hank discovers oil on the ground, which is later identified as containing human lipids. Wu shares a witness statement about a burned man fleeing the scene, giving the team a lead. The burned man is revealed to be Fred Everhart, a former Desert Storm veteran and a demon fire. Fred later attacks Truman but escapes when the police arrive. During the encounter, Fred sprays Wu with his fiery, ketonic substance but stops short of killing him. Nick and Hank realize Fred is not only dangerous, but also a tragic figure, as his human form appears sickly and in pain. Nick tracks down Fred's daughter, Ariel, at a nightclub where she performs fire dances. Ariel, also a demon foyer, immediately recognizes Nick as a Grimm. She teases him and refuses to say where her father is hiding. Following her, Nick discovers her home filled with copper fixtures and signs of fire purging. Ariel kisses him provocatively, but their encounter is interrupted by a call from Juliet, creating tension between Nick and his girlfriend. Research reveals that Demon Foyer has a lineage connected to dragons, and their lairs are often filled with copper and bones. Ariel later lures Nick into a trap by kidnapping Juliet and taking her to the lair to help her dying father. Ariel manipulates Fred by convincing him that Juliet is his mate, pushing him to protect her. Nick turns to Monroe for help in rescuing Juliet, and the duo heads to the lair. Monroe frees Juliet while Nick confronts Fred. In a heated fight, Nick is forced to kill Fred in self-defense. Ariel survives the ordeal and emerges from the lair, furious but alive. The episode ends on a tense note. Nick and Juliet's relationship remains strained, with Juliet questioning whether she can handle the dangers of Nick's life. Nick reflects on his Aunt Marie's warning to let Juliet go, leaving him with doubts about their future together. Renard pushes Adeline to cast a love spell on Hank as part of his plan to manipulate Nick. Although hesitant, Adeline follows his orders and uses a vial of blood provided by Renard to prepare the spell. Meanwhile, Juliet, still unsettled by recent events, asks Nick to teach her how to shoot. Their conversation is interrupted by a nervous refrigerator repairman who awkwardly apologizes for spreading rumors about Nick being a Grimm. He offers a gift as an apology, amusing Juliet, though Nick brushes it off with a made-up explanation. Elsewhere, two Wesson addicts take a drug called J, which boosts their confidence and makes them aggressive. High on J, they storm into a spice shop owned by Freddy, a Fuchsbau. After Adeline finishes her shopping and leaves, the addicts demand more J from Freddy. Under pressure, Freddy directs them to the basement, but sets off the alarm to scare them away. As the addicts flee with the drug, one of them shoots and kills Freddy. Nick and Hank take on the case, and Nick calls Freddy's sister, Rosalie, to break the tragic news. Rosalie, who is initially composed, agrees to meet Nick at the shop. When she sees the scene, her grief overwhelms her, and she unintentionally shifts into her Wesson form, revealing her true identity to Nick. Though wary of him as a Grimm, Rosalie decides to help with the investigation, offering to figure out what the addicts stole. Meanwhile, Adeline visits Hank with cookies laced with the love spell. Unaware, Hank eats them, triggering the spell. At the spice shop, Monroe helps Nick identify J as a dangerous and addictive drug. Rosalie and Monroe bond over their shared Wesson nature, and Rosalie expresses her determination to find the people who killed her brother. That night, the addicts break into the shop again, forcing Rosalie to hide. She escapes and calls Nick, identifying the attackers as Scallengek. Preferring Wesson protection, she asks for Monroe's help instead of involving human officers. Meanwhile, Hank starts experiencing vivid hallucinations of Adeline, showing the spell is working. The next day, Rosalie and Monroe work together at the shop and grow closer. Nick and Hank track down the addicts, but Hank's visions of Adeline distract him, allowing the suspects to escape. Later, Monroe and Rosalie save Wu, who accidentally consumes a dangerous substance from the shop and has a severe allergic reaction. Rosalie quickly makes an antidote, sharing her own past struggles with addiction in the process. Nick and Monroe lead a raid on a Wesson crack house and, with Rosalie's help, capture the addicts. Grateful for her assistance, Monroe offers to support Rosalie as she decides to keep Freddy's spice shop open temporarily. The episode wraps up with Juliet impressing Nick at the gun range, while Hank dreams obsessively about Adeline, showing the love spell's growing hold on him. At the police station, Nick asks Hank about managing tasks and ensuring everything is in order. He confides in Hank about his plan to propose to Juliet during their upcoming weekend getaway, but admits he's nervous she might say no. Hank avoids answering Nick's concerns, and Nick's motivations for proposing remain unclear given their recent relationship struggles. Meanwhile, Robin, a Wesson called a Seltenvogel, hides in the woods near Whispering Pines where Nick and Juliet are headed. She's trying to escape Tim, a Klaustreich who controls and abuses her. At the station, Hank, still under Adeline's spell, obsessively tracks her using police resources. Wu, also affected by the spell's side effects, begins acting strangely, even eating paper clips. Nick and Juliet reach their cabin and stop at Robin's house for directions. When Tim answers the door, Nick notices his hostile attitude and the Wesson transformation. Juliet is also unsettled by Robin's fearful appearance. Later, Juliet witnesses Tim forcefully pulling Robin back inside, and Nick calls the local sheriff for help. Unbeknownst to them, the sheriff is Tim's cousin and part of the abuse. Inside, Tim is forcing Robin to ingest a strange mixture to make her produce a valuable golden egg in her throat, a unique trait of Seltenvogel Wesson. Back in the city, Hank's obsession with Adeline grows and he starts stalking her, even threatening a visitor at her apartment. Meanwhile, Nick consults Monroe and Rosalie, who explain the rarity of Robin's Wesson and the high value of the golden egg. They warn Nick that once the egg is taken, Robin will no longer be of any use to Tim. At Whispering Pines, Nick and Juliet see Robin trying to escape after drugging Tim's tea. Nick follows her into the woods but arrives too late. Tim catches her and drags her back inside. When Nick confronts Tim, he rescues Robin and takes her to his cabin, where she reveals the sheriff's involvement. Tim and the sheriff soon storm the cabin, forcing Robin to run into the woods. Nick chases after her, while Juliet hides. In the woods, Robin collapses and begins expelling the egg. With Rosalie and Monroe guiding him via FaceTime, Nick performs a makeshift procedure to safely remove the golden egg. Tim and the sheriff arrive demanding the egg. Nick distracts them by throwing the egg into the air, subduing the sheriff while Tim escapes. During the chase, Tim trips and the egg shatters, leaving him devastated. Nick arrests him. Back at home, Nick finally proposes to Juliet, but she turns him down, citing his emotional distance and secrecy. Meanwhile, Hank goes on a date with Adalind, and the spell's grip on him tightens. In the trailer, Nick searches for something the mysterious key might fit. Frustrated, he accidentally spills ink on the key, revealing hidden engravings when he presses it to paper. Meanwhile, Renard is held at gunpoint by Woolsey, a subordinate of his cousin, Anton. Taken to an abandoned building, Anton demands the key and warns Renard that their family will retrieve it by force. He fights back, killing Anton and Woolsey, asserting control over the situation. Later, Nick and Juliet head to a double dinner date, where Nick is shocked to see Adalind with Hank. Adalind plays the perfect date, charming Juliet, while Nick struggles to hide his discomfort. When Adalind excuses herself to take a call, Nick follows and warns her to stay away from Hank. She dismisses his concerns, insisting her relationship with Hank is genuine. After a tense exchange, Nick vents his frustration, but Hank interrupts with a call about a new crime scene. Elsewhere, Renard visits Catherine, who asks if her debt will be cleared once Adelind's plan succeeds. Renard assures her that rewards will come to those who help, but warns against failure. Meanwhile, Hank begins showing obsessive behavior due to Adelind's spell, and Wu, still affected by his earlier exposure to the potion, continues eating non-food items. At the crime scene, Nick and Hank find the bodies of Anton and Woolsey. Nick suspects a third person was involved, but Renard seems unfazed when they report their findings. Later, Renard discreetly alters the evidence, swapping the SIM card from a cell phone to erase any trace of his involvement. Nick grows more concerned about Adelind's hold on Hank and talks to Monroe and Rosalie. They suspect a potion is involved, identifying it as Death for Love, a dangerous brew that creates obsessive behavior before killing the victim. Rosalie starts working on an antidote, but warns that if Hank and Adalind have slept together, breaking the spell will be nearly impossible. When Nick tries to warn Hank, it's already too late. Hank and Adalind have spent the night together. Later, Adalind calls Nick, demanding the key in exchange for Hank's life. Rosalie reveals that the only way to break the blood-based spell is with Grimm's blood. At a park meeting, Nick confronts Adalind, goading her into attacking him. During the fight, she ingests his blood, breaking the spell. The curse on Hank is lifted, but Adalind loses her Hexenbist powers and becomes fully human. Feeling defeated, she runs away. At her mother's house, Catherine and Renard scold Adalind for failing. Renard realizes that Nick's smarts could be useful to them. Meanwhile, Nick figures out the engravings on the key, which appear to be part of a map. Nick spends the night in Aunt Marie's trailer, writing about his encounters with Wezen in the Grimm diaries. He's tired but keeps going, reflecting on his recent experiences with Tim, the Klaustrich, and Claire. Meanwhile, in Washington, a Wezen on the run transforms and hides, narrowly escaping a tracker. Soon, a second Wezen arrives, sniffing the air and tracking the first one. The CIA logo on a pillar hints at something bigger going on. In St. Louis, the fleeing Wesson, Ian Harmon, contacts someone about catching a bus to Portland. A tracker bursts into his room, and Ian kills him in self-defense. Before he dies, Ian notices a mark on the tracker's hand, 2 interlocking diamonds. The next day, another tracker finds Ian's note and follows him to Portland. At a bus depot, Ian narrowly escapes another attack, but he's injured and loses his backpack. In Portland, Renard comes home to find the new tracker, Edgar, waiting for him. Edgar works for the Virat, a group connected to the 7 royal families, and he's hunting Ian, a leader of the resistance. He pressures Renard to help, threatening consequences if he refuses. Renard doesn't like Edgar's authority but agrees to cooperate. The next morning, Hank, now clear-headed, picks Nick up for work. Hank is relieved that his relationship with Adalind is over, and he mentions how strange it was to wake up with Rosalie and Monroe in the room. They discuss a shooting at the bus depot, where Wu gives them details, including a witness who describes Ian's backpack. At the spice shop, Ian finds refuge with Rosalie, but she attacks him at first, only to realize he's a former lover and leader of the resistance. Despite his injuries, Ian refuses to go to a hospital, fearing the Virat. Rosalie calls Monroe for help, and together they remove the bullet. Monroe is uneasy about Ian's past with Rosalie, and what his presence in Portland means for the Virat's growing influence. Nick and Hank investigate the bus depot and link Ian to the murder of a bartender at a nearby bar. They don't know Edgar set it up to frame Ian. Meanwhile, Edgar pressures a camera store owner, Reginald, to betray Ian. Rosalie goes to the store to arrange new papers for Ian, but Reginald tips off Edgar, leading to his murder. Edgar then uses Rosalie as bait to lure Monroe and Ian. At the spice shop, Edgar holds Rosalie at gunpoint, threatening to kill her unless Ian is handed over. Monroe arrives with Ian, followed by Nick, who distracts Edgar. Rosalie takes the chance to incapacitate Edgar using Weason powder, and Monroe subdues him in bloodbath form. Ian, knowing the Virat won't stop hunting him, kills Edgar despite Nick's protests. To protect Rosalie and Monroe, Nick pretends to arrest Ian but secretly frees him at the bus depot. Renard, inspecting Edgar's body, warns Nick that Ian's survival is uncertain as the world is on the brink of war, orchestrated by the 7 royal families. Nick examines the weapons in his cupboard, feeling overwhelmed by their deadly potential. Wanting to improve his combat skills, he meets Monroe in the woods for a training session. While they practice, Monroe teases Nick about how little he knows about his grim abilities, but the session is also a chance for them to bond. Meanwhile, at a construction site under a bridge, Robert, an Eisbiber, refuses to pay protection money to Sal, a Haslick troll Wiesen. In retaliation, Sal drowns Robert in a vat of cement. Arnold, a construction worker, witnesses the murder and narrowly escapes when Sal spots him. That night, Arnold seeks refuge with his fellow Eisbiber, John, and tells him what happened. However, Arnold is too scared to come forward, worried about Sal's wrath and the Haslich's control over their community. The next morning, Nick and Hank investigate Robert's murder. They trace the 911 call to Arnold, but find his home empty. Nick recognizes Arnold in a photo with Bud, the refrigerator repairman, and another Eisbiber he's met. Nick visits Bud, who explains that Eisbibers often pays the Haslick to avoid conflict, and warns that Sal controls all bridge construction in Portland. Bud agrees to help Nick find Arnold. At home, Juliet pushes Nick to invite Monroe to dinner to thank him for saving her life. Monroe is excited but nervous, as neither he nor Nick can fully explain their friendship without revealing the truth about Wiesen. Over dinner, they try to cover up their story, blending bits of truth with lies, but Juliet is left bemused, though she appreciates Monroe's charm. Meanwhile, Bud convinces Arnold to bring his story to the Eisbiber Lodge, where the community votes on whether he should testify. Despite Bud's efforts and Nick's encouragement, the lodge votes against it, fearing retaliation from the Haslick. Disappointed, Nick leaves but thanks Bud for trying. Later, inspired by Bud's bravery, Arnold decides to testify and turns himself in at the station. When Sal learns of Arnold's decision, he contacts 2 Reapers, deadly enforcers who hunt Grims. The Reapers threaten Sal into luring Nick to his club, but Sal is arrested before their plan can unfold. As Nick drives Arnold to safety, the Reapers ambush him. Bud and John warn Nick, who leads the Reapers to a secluded spot. Armed with his grim weapons, Nick fights the Reapers, killing one when he accidentally decapitates the other. Nick uses a hemlock-tipped arrow to take down the second Reaper. Nick calls Monroe for help, and together, they dispose of the bodies. To send a message to the Reapers, they box up the severed heads and ship them to Germany with a note that reads, "Next time, send your best." The senior Reaper in Mannheim receives the package and realizes Nick is no ordinary Grim. Back home, Nick finds his living room filled with pies, quilts, and flowers. A heartfelt thanks from the Eisbibers for standing up to Sal. Touched, Nick downplays his actions, saying he was doing his job while Juliet looks on, amused but curious. Images of Arthur and Lucinda, a joyful couple on their wedding day, are displayed. However, things quickly take a dark turn when Arthur loses his money after an investor named Adikoff steals it. Desperate, he seeks help from Spencer, his wife's godfather, and later turns to Lucinda's stepmother, Mavis, for financial assistance, but she refuses. Tensions rise when Spencer transforms into a bat-like Wiesen, a Murcielago, and soon after, Mavis is found dead at the bottom of the stairs, her body showing signs of an attack by a creature. Nick, still haunted by the deaths of his parents, discusses the case with Juliet and agrees to dig deeper. The next morning, Mavis's daughters, Tiffany and Taylor, find her body. The investigation reveals no signs of forced entry, but broken glass and blood suggest a struggle. Mavis had recently spoken about Arthur's financial troubles and had been suspicious of him, thinking he might be hiding something. Spencer is also tied to the case, as Mavis had always disliked him despite his long-standing presence in their family. Juliet contacts Arnold Gubser, a detective from Nick's parents' case, to get more information about an accident that was later reclassified as a homicide, with 4 suspects, 3 of whom Nick recognizes. Meanwhile, Nick and Hank investigate Arthur and Lucinda, but find no clear evidence linking them to Mavis's death. The case takes another turn when Spencer shifts into his bat form, revealing his Wiesen identity. Arthur and Lucinda deny any involvement, but the tension grows. As the investigation continues, Lucinda, who initially seems innocent, confesses that Spencer has been protecting her for years. Spencer admits his obsession with Lucinda and reveals that he killed Mavis and Tiffany, blaming them for mistreating her. Meanwhile, Nick and Monroe use a siren to stop Spencer's high-pitched attacks, which they learned about from Monroe's research on Murcielago Wiesen. Spencer confesses to Nick and Hank, but his true plan is to use the confession for an insanity defense. Spencer manipulates the situation further, warning Nick about Lucinda and claiming she'll inherit everything once her sister Taylor is dead. Nick and Hank rush to protect Taylor, but it's too late. Lucinda, in her bat form, kills Taylor before they can intervene. As Lucinda tries to escape, Nick and Monroe use the siren to trap her, but the glass around her shatters, allowing her to escape. In the final confrontation, Lucinda is killed by Spencer, who later meets his end at her hands. Nick realizes that the siren was the weapon all along, and Renard agrees with his conclusion. Back at home, Nick reflects on the events with Juliet, who apologizes for reopening old wounds, and he reassures her. The episode ends with Nick looking at a photo of the final suspect in his parents' death. Two boys, David Gimlin and Michael Patterson, wander through the jungle in search of Bigfoot. Suddenly, they are attacked and killed. In the next scene, a man named Tom spots a wounded horse in front of his house. He calls Juliet and asks her to come and examine the injured horse. After inspecting the horse's wounds, Juliet says that it looks like a large animal attacked it. The two of them head toward the jungle and discover the dead bodies of the boys. Juliet calls Nick and tells him that she has found a body. Nick arrives with Hank and other officers at the crime scene, where they find a camera. A girl appears from the bushes, crying, and says that Bigfoot killed the two boys. They watch the footage from the camera and see that the killer is wearing a red shirt. Monroe is asleep at home when he hears a noise downstairs. He goes to check and finds his old friend, Larry McKenzie, who turns out to be a wilderman. Larry is badly injured, and Monroe immediately calls Nick, telling him about Larry and asking him to come over. Nick arrives quickly. Monroe explains that Larry is a calm guy and couldn't have killed anyone. He tells Nick that Larry has been attending therapy sessions with Konstantin Brinkerhoff, who is a therapist for Wesson. While they are talking, Monroe catches the scent of search dogs coming toward his house. To keep them away, Monroe wears Larry's shirt and runs into the jungle. As he shifts into his Wesson form, the dogs become frightened and run away. In his Wesson form, Monroe collides with Hank, who is shocked to see him. Monroe goes back home, and just then Larry starts acting strangely. He pulls out a pump from his neck, and then his breathing stops and he dies. Nick and Monroe take Larry's body and the pump to the jungle. In the next scene, Nick confronts Brinkerhoff and asks about Larry. He explains that Larry had been struggling with impulse control. Nick then gets a call from Hank, who tells him that they have found the killer's body in the jungle. An inspector finds a pump with a serial number on it. Nick tells him to track the manufacturer. Meanwhile, Juliet runs a test on the injured horse's hair in the lab. Renard informs the media that they've found the killer's body and that there's no longer a threat. Later that night, two men are drinking beer when one of them steps away to pee. A man named Alan Evercroft attacks him, killing him, and then moves to the other man to kill him as well. However, the second man stabs Alan with a metal rod, killing him. The next morning, Nick and Hank arrive at the crime scene and begin their investigation. They notice that the injuries on the victim are the same as those on Larry's body. Meanwhile, Monroe meets with his old friend, who reveals that Larry had been visiting Brinkerhoff along with two other men, Alan Evercroft and Dan Murray. Monroe tells Nick what his friend shared, and Nick tells him that Alan Evercroft was killed last night. He also mentions that Evercroft had the same type of pump in his body as Larry did. Monroe tries calling Dan Murray, but his brother answers the phone and says that Dan died 2 days ago after climbing out of a window. At the station, Wu tells them that Dr. Brinkerhoff had ordered these pumps 3 months ago. Dr. Brinkerhoff is in his office when Monroe confronts him, demanding to know what drugs he is giving to his patients. Brinkerhoff becomes angry and attacks Monroe. The police arrive, and Brinkerhoff breaks the window and storms off. He runs into a theater, and Nick and Hank follow him, searching for him everywhere. Brinkerhoff tries to attack Nick from behind, but Hank fires a shot, saving Nick's life. Brinkerhoff falls, and when Hank goes to check on him, he sees Brinkerhoff's face change. Hank is shocked by this scene. In the final scene, Nick is with Juliet, and she tells him that she ran a test on the horse's hair, but the results are inconclusive. She mentions that the DNA doesn't match any known species. Juliet admits that she is starting to believe in things like Bigfoot. In a restaurant, Nick and Monroe discuss Hank's condition. Nick says Hank is still in shock from what he saw. Monroe adds that Hank was freaked out when he saw him in bloodbath form. As they leave the restaurant, a man named Nathaniel Adam takes their picture. He calls someone and says it's time for him to come to Portland. At the station, Hank asks Nick what he's doing, and Nick tells him that Interpol has sent a file on Akira Kimura, one of the men responsible for Nick's parents' deaths. Nick explains that Kimura is the one who sold the gold coins to Sam Bertram. In the next scene, Akira Kimura arrives in Portland and is welcomed by Adam. He tells Kimura that Marquesa was involved in a jewelry store robbery where the owner, Sam Bertram, was killed. During the autopsy, 3 gold coins were found in Bertram's stomach. Adam shows Kimura pictures of Nick and Hank, saying these are the detectives handling the case. After Kimura got all the information from Adam, he killed him. Meanwhile, Adeline takes her cat to Juliet, who attacks her. It's revealed that Adelind has cast a spell on the cat. Nick and Hank arrive at the crime scene where they find a coat with only a car key. They search the car and discover a camera, which contains photos of them. Captain Renard comes back to his apartment and finds it trashed. In the kitchen, he discovers his maid's dead body. Just then, Kimura attacks him and takes him hostage, demanding to know where the coins are, but Renard says he doesn't know. Nick, Hank, and other officers arrive, and Kimura flees. Nick tells Renard that Kimura is connected to a secret organization called Dragon's Tongue, which was founded in 1901. Nick then goes to Monroe and tells him about Kimura and how the photos were found on Kimura's private investigator's camera. That night, when Nick is with Juliet, she shows him the bandaged scratch on her hand. She explains that Adelind's cat scratched her. Nick insists that she needs to go to the hospital quickly because Adelind is no ordinary person. Juliet doesn't understand, so Nick takes her to Aunt Marie's trailer, where he shows her books and weapons and explains that he can see people in their true forms. Juliet thinks Nick is mentally disturbed and suggests he needs to see a psychiatrist. To prove his point, Nick takes her to Monroe's house and asks Monroe to transform into his bloodbad form in front of her. Before Monroe can transform, Juliet faints, and Nick rushes her to the hospital. Meanwhile, at Adam's place, a woman takes a picture of Nick and then leaves the room. Inspector Wu sees her and asks her to stop, but she attacks Wu and the other officers, and then escapes from there. At the hospital, Monroe tells Nick that to help Juliet, they need to find the cat that attacked her. They track down Adelind's cat, take it to Rosalie, and ask her to find a cure for Juliet. When Nick gets home, he finds the house has been messed up. He then sees Kimura coming down the stairs. Nick shoots at Kimura, and a fight breaks out. Just then, the woman arrives and kills Kimura. In the final scene, Nick calls her Mom, and that's how Season 1 ends.